Stand Up.
And now, Stand Up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, is there any way I could tell a random social media user their baby is not nearly as cute as they think it is? And does North Korea's latest ballistic missile launch prove once and for all that Kim Jong-un is the king of the penis rocket? And now, the podcast host who would never turn down ivermectin as long as it cures his worms, Pete Dominic.
You are not wrong, Pico, but how did you know about that? I'm pretty sure I didn't share that anywhere. But I do have mice. That's right. Thank you to Peter, the exterminator, for stopping by. He was thorough and helpful, and I'm going to get them all because they can't live with us. I'm sorry. I understand. I feel bad, but you can't live there. You're terrorizing Val, and the general has ordered your execution. I'm so sorry. But yeah, very helpful. I'll give him a shout out, our exterminator. And he come to find out, dude has a shed of his own with solar panels. So we got to talking. We got to some shed comparisons. It was pretty hot and heavy once we started in on the sheds. Yeah, solar panels. So now I got to upgrade and put panels on the actual shed, not just on my house. Anyway, I hope you get a shed and you get your mice. I'm very happy to have you here. I've got quite an episode here for you today. The great Peter Coyote and I had a wonderful, almost hour-long conversation. It was actually New Year's Day, and the latter half of it especially is really soothing and enlightening and helpful. I highly recommend you listen to that interview, especially the last 15 minutes. And former Boston Globe columnist, contributor to MSNBC.com, writer, former State Department speechwriter, a guy whose opinion and perspective I always love, Michael Cohen joins me. He, of course, has the Truth and Consequences newsletter now. We talked about several issues from school reopenings to Build Back Better and why he thinks the pandemic will come to an end in 2022. Lots to get to. Great guests. Excellent show. Tons of news. If you aren't subscribing, subscribe now. StandUpWithPete.com. StandUpWithPete.com. Welcome to new subscribers. Hope to see you tomorrow night at our hangout. Plenty to talk about. With that, we head into the last 24. Well, plenty to talk about in today's news segment, brought to you by GiveWell, givewell.org/standup. If you want to give well, then go to GiveWell. All right, that was annoying, but I said it anyway. People were caught in the snow on Interstate 95. COVID is raging like never before. Voting rights and more. Several audio clips I want to share with you first. Then we'll get to the rest of the headlines in the news dump. Let's start, however, with the main headline, which happens to be
COVID news.
That's right. The United States of America and around the world continues to set records for COVID. We did it. Here are some coronavirus-related headlines. The CDC has reduced booster wait time to 5 months for the Pfizer-BioNTech recipients. An Israeli study has reported five-fold jump in antibodies with the fourth Pfizer vaccine shot, so that's good. President Biden sought a delicate balance Tuesday, reassuring Americans that the country has the tools it needs to combat the latest surge of coronavirus infections, while also urging the unvaccinated to receive their shots and boosters in order to protect against the most severe effects of the Omicron variant. Here he is.
You can still get COVID, but it's highly unlikely, very unlikely, vaccinated, especially those of the booster shots. And by the way, we have booster shots for the whole nation, okay? You can still get COVID, but it's highly unlikely, very unlikely that you become seriously ill. And we're seeing COVID-19 cases among vaccinated in workplaces across America, including here at the White House. But if you're vaccinated and boosted, you are highly protected. You know, be concerned about Omicron, but don't be alarmed. But if you're unvaccinated, you have some reason to be alarmed. Many of you will, you'll experience severe illness in many cases if you get COVID-19.
You know, he wanted to say you might die. You get really sick and die. But Joe Biden measures his words, which is what you want a politician, the president of the United States, to do, as opposed to just fly off the handle and suggest that you spray bleach into your veins. But he wanted to be like, many of you, if you're not vaccinated, you're really fucked. So he made these comments from the White House during meetings with the White House COVID team yesterday, and he also went on to talk about how we'll be able to treat it in the future. Talk about this more with Michael Cohen, but here again, the president yesterday.
Today, I'm directing my team to work with Pfizer to double our order from 10 million to 20 million treatment courses to be delivered in the months ahead. We may need even more. That's the estimate we need right now. We've already placed the largest order in the world. Now I'm doubling that order. These pills are going to dramatically decrease hospitalizations and deaths from COVID-19.
All right, the president meeting with his task force yesterday, making remarks after, and now let's get to the governor. Yesterday we heard from, well, anytime I see governors talking about COVID, I'll try to play them for you. Here's Maryland Governor Republican Larry Hogan talking about what's going on in his state.
Today, Maryland hit a record high of 3,057 COVID hospitalizations, which is an increase of more than 500% in the last 7 weeks, and which is now overwhelming normal operations at hospitals.
All right. Well, that is quite an emergency in Maryland. Let's go to the Surgeon General of the United States, Vivek Murthy. He was on CNN's New Day yesterday talking about schools.
As you mentioned, I'm a dad of 2 kids. One of them is old enough to be vaccinated. My son is 5, and he's now fully vaccinated. But my daughter is under 5, and she's not eligible yet for a vaccine. My wife and I are planning to send her to school because, our school has the appropriate layers of precaution. It's a public school in Washington, D.C., and we feel proud of what they're doing. But in the next few weeks, schools are going to have to make some challenging decisions here. We hope that they use these mitigation measures that we know work to keep our kids safe. But I recognize that in some cases, schools may have to make temporary emergency decisions if they have a large number of staff, for example, who are out sick, or if they feel they can't take these measures. But the goal is, keep our kids in school. That is our top priority. We just need to do it safely. Our mitigation measures can help us do that.
All right. More confusion coming from the government on schools at the federal level and the state level. It ain't easy, folks. That's for sure. And it certainly is easy to criticize and throw stones. But if you're not trying to solve the problem, maybe not so much complaining. I don't know. Why am I moralizing? Well, yesterday I did play Scott Gottlieb, and I woke up to a text from smart cousin Darcy, who listens early in the morning, and she told me that what she thinks is wrong with Scott Gottlieb is that he's been overly optimistic about the end of this thing for months. She says, don't get me wrong, he's been an important voice throughout this thing, and he worked his ass off in the early days to sound the alarms. But since the beginning of Delta, maybe before, he's been predicting the end of the pandemic and is contributing to the whiplash we all feel every time our glimmer of hope is dashed by yet another variant. Is he right this time? Maybe. There are others who are saying the same, but he acts like he's got a crystal ball that none of us have, perhaps because it keeps him coming on as a regular guest and makes him a lot of money. So there's some things I don't mind hearing from him, but his predictions about the end of COVID can go suck an egg. Signed, quote, smart cousin Darcy. She and I are having a lot of fun rekindling our relationship from our childhood through the podcast. And she's always been like a big sister and a mentor to me. So I love hearing from her, and I'll try to share those messages because they're fun. But smart cousin Darcy also turned me on to epidemiologist who I read yesterday, Dr. Caitlin Jettalina, who you can subscribe to her Substack. It's called Your Local Epidemiologist. And as she writes, there is good news. I received thousands of emails, messages, and comments after my last post, which is the one I read to you here on the show yesterday, all asking, she writes, essentially saying the same thing. Is there any hope? So I interrupt my regular broadcast with a big, loud answer. Yes! After reading through these messages, I realized that while I and others actively respond to crises, we've neglected to communicate how far we've come. One of public health's biggest challenges is that when it works, it's largely invisible. This isn't the case in other fields. For example, in medicine, you can see the impact of a surgery. In the drug industry, you can see the immediate effect of a prescription. But in public health, we don't see what we prevented. For example, how much do you really appreciate seatbelts on a daily basis? Seeing what public health prevents is nearly impossible for the untrained eye. So This is what we aren't seeing right now. And she went on to talk about all the good things, including that vaccines are working, and not just working okay, they're working incredibly well. She says, I know this is hard to believe and everyone around us is testing positive, but vaccines are doing their primary job, keeping people out of the hospital. She also says, in addition to vaccines, we actually got really lucky with Omicron on quite a few fronts, and that more help is coming because the FDA just announced the authorization of 2 more antigen tests. Also, at-home rapid tests will soon finally be reimbursed by insurance. Pfizer ramping up production for antivirals. And we've got enough for 300,000 Americans by the end of February and eventually 120 million courses in 2022. A dream coronavirus is in clinical trials that, if successful, will prevent severe disease from all future coronaviruses. And kids under 5 will get the vaccine by the summer. The bottom line, she writes, public health is invisible when it works. Although we are in a crisis mode right now, our tools are working and help is on the way. Every EPI curve come down. This one will too. Don't take Omicron lightly, but don't lose hope either. All right. Well, how about that for a lot of positivity from Dr. Caitlin Jetelina? Go subscribe to her Substack, Your Local Epidemiologist. And thank you to Smart Cousin Darcy for turning me on to her. And guess who she tweets? She retweeted Aaron Carroll, and he is going to join me right here on Yesterday. On Yesterday? I just said that. Tomorrow. He's going to be here tomorrow. That was awesome. I'm leaving it in there. And just send me your emails. Any questions for Dr. Carroll, standupwithpete@gmail.com. I'm talking to him at around 11:30 on Thursday. So if you're listening early, send me an email with a question. All right, that is a wrap on today's
COVID news.
And now let's go to the other big story yesterday. And for this, I turn to CNN's Jay Tapper and Jamie Gangel.
We have some breaking news for you in our politics lead right now. The House Select Committee investigating the January 6th Capitol insurrection has just released the letter that its members sent to Fox News host Sean Hannity today, asking for his cooperation with their probe into the deadly attack. Let's bring in CNN's Jamie Gangel. Jamie, walk us through what the letter says and what the committee is asking Mr. Hannity for.
So first of all, they're asking him for voluntary cooperation, Jake, and it's based on the fact that they say they have a series of texts, multiple texts from him to former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, as well as other members of the White House staff. Let me just read you from the top of the letter. They say to Hannity that it indicates that he had, quote, advanced knowledge regarding President Trump's and his legal team's planning for January 6th. It goes on to say that it appears Hannity was, quote, expressing concerns and providing advice to the president and certain White House staff regarding the planning. It goes on to say that Sean Hannity, quote, also had relevant communications while the riot was underway and in the days thereafter. And that, quote, the communications make you a fact witness in our investigation. Within the letter, they have released a number of text messages. They say that there are others in addition to that. But let me just give you one example, Jake. They refer to a text message on January 5th. This would be obviously the night before the riot. And they say, on January 5th, the night before the violent riot, you sent and received a stream of texts. You wrote, quote, I'm very worried about the next 48 hours. With the counting of the electoral votes scheduled for January 6th at 1 p.m., this is now the committee saying to Hannity, why were you concerned about the next 48 hours? So, Jake, we're still going through it. We're just looking at this letter now, but I think it gives you a sense of two things. One is, while they say in the letter that they have the utmost respect for the First Amendment, they feel that Sean Hannity has relevant information that does not interfere with the First Amendment. And it's also obvious from their letter that they have, it would seem, dozens, if not more, email exchanges in this critical period of time, Jake.
Jamie Gangel, thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, CNN, Jay Tapper, and Jamie Gangel for setting me up here, because this was a big story, drove a lot of cable news for sure, because it's Sean Hannity. And yes, it's just a letter saying, hey, you come over here and talk to us, because we got a whole slew of texts. And I suppose we could subpoena you, but maybe you just voluntarily want to come over and explain all these text messages that we got from you. Well, here is Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren, who's investigating this. She's a Democrat. She also was on CNN with Jay Tapper.
About Jay Sekulow saying that he's concerned about this request from your committee, not a subpoena, but a request to speak with Sean Hannity is an infringement on his First Amendment rights. What's your response? What information do you want from Mr. Hannity?
Well, we're not asking about his broadcasts or anything to do with his press activity. He is a fact witness. We have in our possession dozens of texts that he sent to Mark Meadows and others in his role as apparent political operative, indications of his communications with the president and others on strategy. And it's that we would like to talk to him about. I want to make sure that everyone knows this isn't a subpoena. We've asked him to cooperate with us as a fact witness out of his sense of patriotism. And we hope that he will respond because we have so many of these texts and pieces of evidence indicating that he was outside of his role as a press person acting as a political operative.
And now, folks, if you want to know why it's always a false equivalency, I mean, there's so many ways to prove it, but why Sean Hannity at 9 o'clock at Fox News is not the same as Rachel Maddow at 9 o'clock on MSNBC, it's because Hannity was constantly talking to the President of the United States. He was a political operative. I mean, there's no doubt. They're in constant conversation. Now, in the past, presidents bring together progressive or conservative commentators and columnists and pundits. They come to the White House and they have long chats. That's not abnormal. They have relationships even with columnists. That's not abnormal as well. But being a political operative, that is really abnormal, especially when you're one of the top most influential political voices in the country. 3 hours of radio every day, an hour of TV, and all the clips the internet can take. Anyway, here is Rachel Maddow last night at 9 o'clock, the same time Sean Hannity probably wasn't talking about this news, asking the one key question.
That threat to resign would appear to have been a response to the pressure that was being put on Vice President Mike Pence by Trump and his co-conspirators, pressure to try to get Mike Pence to effectively spoil the counting of the Electoral College votes in Congress on January 6th. Did Pat Cipollone threaten to resign on New Year's Eve, on January 3rd, on January 5th? Again, we do not know if Mr. Hannity will respond to this request for him to provide information to this committee to sort of flesh out the facts around those previously unknown details about what happened. It is interesting that they are appealing to his patriotism in asking him to give information to the committee. I don't know. I think regardless of party, regardless of cable news outlet of your choice, all Americans would like to know what Mr. Hannity knew on January 5th that made him text to the White House, I am very worried about the next 48 hours. What did he know about what was going to happen in the next 48 hours that made him tell the White House chief of staff he was very worried? We shall see.
Maybe nothing. I mean, she's just asking questions. See, I don't love that. I don't love that. I don't love that kind of commentary. What did he know? Shall see. Maybe he didn't know anything. Is there any evidence that a lot of people were worried about the next 48 hours, not just Sean Hannity. That's why I don't love that kind of journalism. I was giving her credit because she's not Sean Hannity. That's for damn sure. But I don't love that. What am I missing? What am I missing? What do you think of that? Am I off? I'd love to hear from you. standupwithpete@gmail.com. Okay, well, January 6th is tomorrow if you're listening to this on the 5th, and President Trump was supposed to be giving some kind of press conference at Mar-a-Lago, but it got canceled. Some people are speculating that maybe he got COVID again, which actually it was just Tom Falone who listens to the show. Tom's the only person I saw saying that, and I feel bad now for saying some people because it was just Tom, but I thought that's pretty smart. Yeah, could have. I mean, everybody's going to get it. He could definitely get it again, right? Huh? Why not? Anyway, President Kamala Harris are going to be making comments tomorrow as well. And let's walk into the press briefing room and hear from Jen Psaki talking about and reminding people who said what and did what about what on January 6th.
Many Republican members of Congress have stood by the big lie since then. They were outraged at the time, about many of them, about the events that happened on January 6th. Who could not be? Who was watching them? And since then, they have done nothing to help support the work of the committee, to help argue against the big lie. And, you know, that sort of lack of action, inaction, silence, is something that is irresponsible as well.
All right, here is Congressman Eric Swalwell on the same issue.
We're up against a Republican Party that chooses violence over voting. And on January 6th, as we commemorate and honor the fallen officers and the wounded officers of that day, the Republicans will be celebrating the arsonist of that day and Donald Trump. And that's a contrast we have to draw for every American.
All right, here now is Senator Raphael Warnock of Georgia, just reminding us that our democracy is under serious threat and peril. Always good to be reminded.
Let's be really clear. Our democracy is imperiled, and time is running out. This is a moral moment. And if we fail to protect the voices and the votes of the American people, then we have fallen way short of our responsibility as members of this body. In the state of Georgia right now, as the state legislature comes together for a new session, there is an effort to get rid of every drop box in the state. Think about that. In the middle of a pandemic with the Omicron variant, and we don't know what the days ahead will bring, something that their duty is to get rid of drop boxes. What will that do for rural voters who are trying to exercise their vote? What about workers on the night shift? It's very clear what the Republican Party is up to. They are trying to make it harder for some people to vote and easier to cheat.
All right, and a great commentary by Senator Warnock, as always. Now let's go to comedian Jim Gaffigan, who, I don't know why, I guess he's promoting something, but for some reason he was on The View. He's gotten more outspoken. I've known Jim my whole career, and he was never political, and he has gotten more and more outspoken, I think, trying to live his Christian values the way that he has always seen them. Jim Gaffigan on The View being critical of billionaires. This is kind of fun.
You have a responsibility. Like if you're making $200 billion, I'm sorry to bother you, but you should probably figure out how you can help civilization. Like, I don't know if that's not like a big ask. You know what I mean? It's like maybe you take 1/10 of your billions of dollars and you help maybe underprivileged people in your community. I don't know. It's like, I'm a cheap bastard too, but like, come on.
All right, and speaking of The View, here is Anna Navarro. She went pretty viral. She was trending.
Look, Joey, there's things which I think should transcend partisanship and should transcend politics. And a breach of the U.S. Capitol, an attack on our democratic principles and institutions should be one of those things. And I really blame Republicans at the top for capitulating to Trump. I blame Trump for continuing this environment of lies and conspiracy theories and not accepting that he lost and encouraging and promoting what happened, the big lie and what happened on January 6th. He bears responsibility. And it's not just me saying this. It was Kevin McCarthy saying this on January 6th. Let me read to you what he said. Kevin McCarthy, the president bears responsibility for Wednesday's attacks on Congress by mob rioters. McCarthy said on the House floor, he should have immediately denounced the mob when he saw what was unfolding. These facts require immediate action by President Trump. Now, just days later, that same Kevin McCarthy was at Mar-a-Lago kissing Trump's ring. And we've seen Republican after Republican who on January 6th was shocked and calling for investigation and for truth and for reaction and action from Trump. We've seen them bow down to Trump because they want to stay elected. and because they're putting their own positions over democracy and over defending the U.S. institution of a legitimate election. Look, I felt that Donald Trump had not been legitimately elected. I thought he'd gotten help from the Russians. But you know what? It would have never occurred to me to take up arms against Donald Trump. That's just not what we do in America. Our weapon of choice is voting. It's democracy. It's the ballot. And so I hope people remember January 6th. You know why? You know how? By registering to vote, by making sure they know where they have to show up to vote, because there are elections this year, and they are so crucial.
All right, Ana Navarro getting fired up on on ABC's The View. I met her and worked with her at CNN, and we always got along well. She used to join me on the old show. I should reach out to Ana Navarro. She's pretty influential. It'd be great to talk to her about, well, her whole career. Yeah, let's do it. All right, well, that's all the sound I got for you. I'm not going to play that Peter Navarro clip from MSNBC. He was on Ari Melber. I watched the whole 10-minute thing. Joe Liotta sent that to me, and I did watch it, Joe. It was interesting. It was entertaining, but I'm not going to play any of it. I hate that guy, Peter Navarro. He's a real piece of shit, and I don't say that lightly. I really don't. I don't like to call people those names, but that guy is he's a real garbage monster. I'm sorry. Again, I really hate being so dehumanizing, but I also really don't like that guy and can't bear to put him on the program. He's just such a grifter. It's one thing to have to play Trump every once in a while. So just to be clear, I like Ana Navarro, but not her evil brother, Peter Navarro. I just realized that they have the same last name. I do not think they are related. All right, well, let's get to all of the rest of the headlines, not necessarily COVID or politics, things you might have missed. That's why we call it the News Dump. Another great News Dump jingle by Pete Coe.
C-Lab 2021, in my throat a lump. Will they have to change the name for today's News Dump?
Sir, what are you doing? Silence! I'm psychoflexing.
Well, if you don't know what the hell that was, I didn't either. But apparently that is a Cartoon Network TV show that I guess got canceled. It's called C-Lab 2021. And apparently Pete Coe was a really big fan, and he's very upset because it's a hilarious show. And now the name doesn't make any sense, and he's bummed. So he somehow crowbarred that disappointment into a News Dump jingle. Well done, sir. I hope that gets your show back. And Pete Coe also tweeting about this news story, which I'll include because it's just really weird. But there are these two celebrity identical twins in France. They're 72 years old, and they've been around publicly for a long time. They had all kinds of TV shows in the 70s about science and science fiction, apparently. But they were also known for their involvement in cryptocurrencies and controversies and so much more. They also had these increasingly odd facial features, and though they denied ever having plastic surgery, they certainly look like they had serious plastic surgery. Their names are the Bogdanovs, and they refused to get vaccinated, both of them, and then they died days apart. They promoted hydroxychloroquine as a COVID cure, and they wanted to wait until different vaccines were developed. And now these two famous celebrity identical twins who had tons of plastic surgery died 6 days apart after failing to get vaccinated. I mean, I don't know. They said they didn't have tons of plastic surgery, but if you looked at their faces, these twins look like they had the most serious kinds of... It's wild. You got to check it out. Anyway, all right, moving on. A record 4.5 million Americans quit their jobs in November. Sign of confidence and more evidence that the U.S. job market is bouncing back strongly from last year's coronavirus recession. How about that? Just also saw that the Golden Globes is not going to have a red carpet. I'm pretty disappointed. Actually, I'm distraught over this. I bet you my dad is, too. My dad loves award shows. He's going to be very upset. 79th annual Golden Globes will have no red carpet, no audience, and no media coverage. I'll have to call him tomorrow and ask him how he feels about that. Oh, by the way, NBC severed ties with the awards show after some real serious racial issues. All right, well, North Korea, as Pete Coe, I think, mentioned in the opening, fired a suspected ballistic missile into the sea. South Korean, Japanese military saying North Korea fired a suspected ballistic missile into its eastern waters, the first such launch in about 2 months amid a long-dormant international diplomacy on the North's nuclear program. Apparently, also, some high-tech cameras caught that on the missile was one of Kim Jong-un's uncles. They actually duct taped him onto the missile and sent him into space. So you have to look into that story to see if I just made that up. Apparently, a new study is saying that vaccine lotteries did not help increase the rate of shots. At least 19 states offered prizes up to $5 million. I didn't get my free college tuition for Ava yet. I guess I didn't win. I didn't win that. American activists are now appealing to Tesla to close a new showroom in China's northwestern region, where officials are accused of abuses against mostly Muslim ethnic minorities. That's the story I'm following closely. The first Cambodian American mayor has taken office in the United States. His name is Sakari Chow. I think I said that right, hopefully. He was chosen Monday by a majority of city councilors in Lowell, Massachusetts, to serve the city's top position. He also became the city's first Asian American mayor as well. 49-year-old Chow is a federal government employee who worked for the U.S. Social Security Administration after being sworn in. He said, "God bless America, right? I was a refugee, now I'm mayor of a major city in Massachusetts." And added, "I don't know if that could happen anywhere else in the world. I'm still trying to absorb it." And then he quit, which is super weird. He was just, you know what? Fuck it. I'm out of here. I don't even like Lowell. I'm kidding. Hey, that last part is not true. He's still mayor. And Pabst Brewing Company is in trouble. They're expressing regret for their promotional campaign gone wrong in a series of tweets regarding Dry January, the annual alcohol-free movement. Is that right? I didn't even realize that was happening. Huh. It published Pabst published the brand's social media account on Monday. They tweeted, "Not drinking this January?" And then asked in a now deleted tweet, "Try eating ass." String of crude replies to delighted Twitter's users were also fired up, perhaps most notably when the brand shot back, "Ask your mom," to a user who asked, "PBR or ass? What's the difference?" And Pabst responded, "Ask your mom." So, yeah, I guess they're in trouble. I mean, we'll see what happens with Pabst. That is a crazy story. And here are the women who will be appearing on Quarters in 2022. Maya Angelou, Sally Ride, Nina Otero Warren, who was a leader in New Mexico's suffrage movement, Anna May Wong, considered the first Chinese-American film star in Hollywood. And yeah, that's it. Oh, Wilma Mankiller, which is an interesting last name. She, of course, a member of the Cherokee Nation, and she founded the Community Development Department for the Cherokee Nation, which focused on improving housing and water. She was also awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. All women who we should learn more about. PG&E Electrical Equipment sparked the massive Dixie Fire in California, according to a new investigation. And the icy I-95 in Virginia is finally reopened after storm left hundreds of drivers stranded, including, I think, some listeners. Let me know. Hopefully that wasn't you. Always good to have a bag in the car, folks, filled with supplies, everything you would need in the case of an emergency like that. You got to get one of those big USB batteries and keep it powered up, too. And that is today's news dump, folks, and I hope that you got as much out of it as I did researching it and finding out what is going on. All right, coming up, an amazing conversation with Peter Coyote. Again, I highly recommend. I mean, just if you don't forget to do this, go to the end of the podcast today. If you don't get to the end of it, just go to the end of it at some point and rewind about 20 minutes and listen to the last 20 minutes of my conversation with Peter Coyote, where we got real deep. Maybe it was last like 15, but it was awesome. He gave me great advice to how to navigate this and every other challenging journey in our lives. But first, I've got former Boston Globe columnist and now the author of the Substack newsletter, Truth and Consequences, truthandcons.com. He's a former speechwriter for the State Department. He is the author of two very, very good books, which you should get. All the links for Michael Cohen, the columnist, the writer, the journalist, not the lawyer, are in today's show notes. I always love when we talk, and we caught up. We talked about schools, Build Back Better, Mitch McConnell, the pandemic. We ended on a good positive note. He wrote for MSNBC about the outlook for 2022. He's a great follow on Twitter. One of my favorites, as a matter of fact. Always makes me think. I don't always agree with him, but he has been highly influential in the way I think about so many of the issues that we're dealing with today. On Twitter, @SpeechBoy71. Called him last night. Here we go. Okay, there he is. Michael Cohen, everybody. Thank you for joining me. I've really been enjoying your latest writing, and I wanted to ask you about it. How are you doing? Do you have COVID again?
No, I just had a negative test this morning. I'm leaving for Cancun, supposed to on Friday, so hoping that I can maintain healthiness between now and then.
Oh, wow. How'd you get your hands on a test?
A friend loaned it to me. They had a bunch of extras, and I got it, and so that was good. And I take a PCR test tomorrow morning. It has to be a clean one, and if it's clean, I assume it will be since I tested negative today. I'm off to Cancun on Friday. And you'll not hear from me for 6 days.
That's awesome. You're gonna abandon.
I tweet a little bit, just take pictures, make people feel bad. Right. We're stuck in the Northeast, that kind of thing.
You're one of those guys.
The way I roll.
Imagine if you were stuck on I-95 yesterday for 27 hours, and you were seeing Michael Cohen's beach photos while you're stuck in your car. What a dick.
What an asshole, honestly. But Tim Kaine, 27 hours in the car. I mean, I can't even imagine. I would lose my mind.
I'm sure he did. The senator from Virginia, in case anybody didn't know who Tim Kaine is. But he's driving from somewhere in Virginia to D.C.?
In Virginia, yeah.
Not even a long drive.
Yeah, no, I would have literally just, set the car on fire and just walked to the nearest, I don't know, place I could find.
Well, let's talk about the Senate, because I think you wrote something like, I just lost it, I don't have it in front of me, but like New Year's, same kind of issues. We're talking about COVID and the Build Back Better bill together. And there's been some major developments, it would seem, in the last few days, especially with Joe Manchin on potentially being okay with some kind of climate change spending.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, one thing I think that, and I've been very critical of Manchin, but one thing I will say is that he has been sort of consistent in saying what he wants. And when he creates these kind of red lines of where he won't go over, he expects the Democrats, expects Biden to meet his requests. And on climate, there is, in the proposal that he apparently gave to the White House, $500 billion in climate spending. And a lot of people have said that, he's not supporting the bill because he's too close to the coal industry, he's got a vested interest. But that doesn't seem to be the case. It does seem as though he is supportive of, a pretty significant expenditure in climate spending. Now, again, that proposal has been shaped to meet his requirements. But nonetheless, I don't get the sense he's not supportive of it. And if you can get $500 billion in climate spending, you have to take that deal. It's not the deal that I would want, or I think most Democrats would want, right. But we are in a climate crisis. And if you can get $500 billion to fight the climate crisis, take the deal. Period.
So it looks like there might still be breath in Build Back Better. It would have to be passed by a carve out, around the filibuster, I guess.
Well, no. You can do the Build Back Better via the budget reconciliation process, which just needs a majority vote. Now, here's the thing. The climate spending comes with other things in the bill that Democrats like universal childcare. Universal pre-K that Manchin said he supports, fully resourcing money for Obamacare subsidies. What he's not going to support is the child tax credit because he says it's going to cost too much money. I think this is ridiculous. I think it's counterproductive. But, look, we can all say that it's ridiculous that Joe Manchin has this much power over Democrats' legislative agenda, but it is what it is. And if getting $500 billion in climate change, spending, getting in Obamacare subsidies, getting in fully paid for universal pre-K means losing child tax credit, again, you take that deal. And then you go back in the next day and you try to push child tax credit through the Senate in the hope that someone like Mitt Romney and we'll get other Republicans to go along with it, which is possible. Look, voting against child tax credit means voting for a tax increase on American working class families.
Right.
So make that political argument. You might lose it, but it's a good political argument for you.
So you put this newsletter out today, which I think is really interesting and important. We're all talking about it right now, specifically the schools, and talking about how Omicron is having an effect on schools. And so I want to I stirred it up last night on the Facebook, on the community Facebook page, my community, where it's mostly like a bunch of right wingers, and I jump in there and I'm just respectful to everybody. I'm just cool. I'm not even barely snarky. Sometimes I make jokey posts, but I wrote this, and I want your reaction. This is what I wrote, and I want your reaction. I wrote, there's been quite a bit of concern over schools shutting down. Again, I'm honestly confused about it. If most of the adults who open, operate, and teach at the schools can't come to work because they're too sick, then what are we supposed to do? What solutions are there to this potential situation? This sucks for everybody, but constantly laying blame and trying to be divisive about it doesn't help. This is an honest question I've got. If there are no adults in the schools, how can we send our kids to them? If there aren't enough bus drivers or cafeteria workers, on and on, should we just organize a carpool? Does anyone know how to run the boiler, teach algebra? Who wants to clean the bathrooms? So that's it. That's it.
I agree with you. I think that. So, okay, it's interesting about this because I find myself really torn on this issue. I think schools should be open. I think remote learning is a disaster for kids. And forgetting the educational element, which is obviously important, just the socialization element is important. And my kids, went back in September 2020. They were hybrid. They were half at school, half at home. But thankfully, our school rented a local movie theater, so they could actually be around other kids when they're supposed to be at home. So they were basically socializing with their classmates 5 days a week. And it was fantastic for them. And I think they really, as a result, didn't really suffer the same way other kids did by not being able to see their friends during the pandemic. And I think a lot of kids have suffered. And, David Lee and I had a really important piece today. I wrote about it in my newsletter, pointing out how much kids have been affected negatively by the pandemic. Educationally, from a mental health standpoint, you've seen a rise in teen suicide, you've seen a rise in gun violence and so forth. So kids should be back. Having said that, your point is spot on. There is also a point when you can't open the schools because you don't have the resources and the staff to do it. My school, where my kids go, shut down on Monday because they couldn't open. They didn't have the staff for it. The principal made a unilateral decision to close the school. Now, she's actually getting in trouble with the Department of Education about it and being investigated and facing a disciplinary hearing over it. But, I understand why she did it, and I would understand, and I think it's fine. But the next day they were back, and they've been back, and, they have some staffing issues. But as long, your point is exactly right. Schools can't open if they don't have the staff. But I think what's happening is that the schools, especially in New York City where I live, the DOE and the teachers have said, we want the schools to be open.
Yeah.
And so I think I think what's happening here is that the people who say schools should always be open are freaking out and saying, the teachers are blaming them for this. When I think your point is exactly right. This is a staffing issue. But beyond that, it's just the fact that, most kids are back in school. And most school districts are trying to get kids back in school. So I think this debate, we've sort of moved on from this debate about should schools not, or should they not be open? They are open. And I think everyone wants them to be open. Everyone recognizes they should be open, which is why I had a problem with Leonhardt's piece. I think that his point is was germane 6 months ago. I'm not sure it's germane today. My kid's school was the first day it's been closed this school year was on Monday. The kids have been back in school. So I think that, we should recognize that. And that I think most school districts and most politicians are on the same page when it comes to schools being open.
I mean, I think that's probably pretty true. I don't think there's that much divisiveness around it. And I think we all agree that it's done a lot of damage to our kids. And then, people, a lot of people saying, well, easy for you, you can work from home. I can't do that. Who's going to watch my kid? I got to go to work. I'm like, I'm not saying that. I get that. It's implied. I'm saying, but if there's no bus driver, your kid can't get to school. It's not an option.
Exactly.
So, all right.
It's like if there's a snow day and teachers can't get to school and kids can't get to school, there's no school. I mean, it's the same kind of situation in a lot of ways.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, for sure. Okay, let me just play for you now the clip of Mitch McConnell, and then I will argue with you, and then you can leave.
Okay, I guess. See how it goes.
All right, here we go.
I think they assume that people who get elected to the legislatures are idiots. They get elected by the people, too. Why would any legislature in America want to overturn the counting of votes? They have to get elected by those people, too. The notion that some state legislature would be crazy enough to say to their own voters, we're not going to honor the results of the election, is ridiculous on its face.
Is it ridiculous on its face? We have eyes, sir, is what I tweeted, Michael Cohen. 147 House Republicans voted to overturn the 2020 election results. In Michigan and other states, they tried to overturn the election results. And since then, Bannon and others have been working loudly to get people into state seats who will deny, reject, and overturn legitimate results, sir.
Pete, this is a tough one for me because I kind of agree with Mitch McConnell. That doesn't happen very often, but I think he has a point. Again, hard words for me to say, but I have to be honest. Your point, I get the point you're making, but if you go back and look at what happened in 2020, no state legislature actively tried to not certify the election results. And I go back to you mentioned Michigan is a good example of that. You know, Donald Trump literally brought the two Republican leaders of the state, the House and Senate in Michigan to the White House to push them not to certify the results that showed Biden won in the state, and they refused to do it. He tried to literally got on the phone. We have a recording, you can play it. Tried to get the Secretary of State in Georgia to overturn the election results, and he refused to do it. And not only did he refuse to do it, he dimed Trump out to the Fulton County District Attorney because he recorded the call and turned over all the information.
Yeah.
So, look, I recognize there were state legislators in states like Pennsylvania and Michigan and Arizona who did want to overturn the results, but they were a very small minority. And in most cases, Republicans did not do that. Now, I understand the argument that it can be different in 2024, and that's certainly possible. But I think that there's a point here that McConnell makes that we should consider, which is it is extremely difficult for any public official to literally steal an election. It is a hard thing to do. It is there are legal constraints, there are moral constraints, there are ethical constraints. There's even parochial constraints in that if you say the election was invalid, you also could be saying your election was invalid. Because if you're both elected in the same election, well, how is one valid and one not valid?
Right.
A little hard to do. And I think that these fears about a stolen election, we've talked about this before, I think are overstated. I really think they are. I don't think that's what we should be concerned about. There are other things to be concerned about, like, efforts to restrict people from voting, like partisan gerrymandering that basically ensures that we have like 20 competitive races, House races in 2022. But I think McConnell's point that, it's a really hard thing to do if there's clearly an evidence that, say, Joe Biden won by 20,000 or 50,000 votes, to say, screw that, we're going to pick the other guy. That is not so easy to do. And I think people are overstating how difficult it is to do that. Politically and I think, normatively, I think it's just it's one thing to say you support that Donald Trump should be elected president in 2020. He won the election. It's one thing to say that. There's no impact on saying it. I mean, there's an impact, but there's no direct impact on the election. It's one thing to actively conspire with Trump to steal an election. That's something different. And I'm not as convinced as I think a lot of people are that Republicans would do that. Which maybe makes me naive, maybe, but that's what I think.
I would never say that about you.
You can say it about me. It's okay.
I wouldn't say it about you. I wouldn't, and I would never threaten to burn your house down either.
Pete, in my defense, I didn't threaten to burn your house. I threatened to burn your shed down.
I know, but it was harsh, and it made me feel unsafe, and it was, of course, private text messaging.
That's true. That's true. But you did say some things also to me that made me uncomfortable. I think we have to be clear about that.
Okay, well, all I said was I wanted to massage you with baby oil at some point before you leave for Cancun.
That wasn't the part that made me uncomfortable.
Oh, okay.
That was the part I enjoyed that part.
Well, let me end on a good note. Not that wasn't one. I look forward to you and I with a couples massage. But you wrote a pretty good piece over there at the MSNBC, a pretty optimistic piece. As you also wrote an optimistic book, co-wrote not too long ago before a pandemic broke out.
I'm all about the optimism, Pete. All about it.
This is titled COVID Vaccines and New COVID Treatments Ought to Make 2022 the End of the Pandemic. You looked at a lot of information here, and you wrote a piece. Give me some points, arguments, whatever, make you think that 2022 it's over, or what it looks like, because This is a great piece, and we'll share it, of course, in the show links.
Well, I think there's three things here. One is obviously vaccinations. 70% of the country is vaccinated. You're seeing a very slow but continued rise in vaccinations. So a lot of people are vaccinated. I keep making this point, and I will continue to bring it up, that something like 48% of all humanity has been vaccinated in the past year. It doesn't make you optimistic about the ingenuity of our species. I don't know what else will. Think about that for a second. Like, we're talking close to 4 billion people have been vaccinated in the past year. 8 billion shots got out. It's amazing.
And the amount of time to develop and develop and create the vaccine, much less get it out and put it in people's arms. Yeah.
To develop it is one thing, right? As you said, exactly. Then the logistics of literally getting it in the arms of nearly 4 billion people.
Yep.
4 billion, by the way, that's fully vaccinated. Fully vaccinated. It's incredible. It really is. In this country, obviously, the numbers are not where they should be. You still have these holdouts who, selfishly insist not getting vaccinated. But I think the numbers are moving in the right direction. I think we're slowly getting there. Second thing is that we now have much better treatments for COVID. Right, the two pills that we have, Pfizer pill, Moderna pill, that have FDA approved. I think this is a big deal, and I think this can really help with people who get sick. The third thing is, and this gets back to the point I made earlier, there's been a cultural shift around COVID. I think people who are vaccinated have said, you know what, we are ready to move on from this. And I think one thing about the schools that's really important is that I don't think you're hearing calls to close schools. People are saying, we want kids back in schools. We're not going to keep going back to where we were 18 months ago. We're in a very different place now. People, I think, are willing to accept the possibility of getting sick, which I think they weren't willing to accept, obviously, a year ago because they're vaccinated. Yeah. And I think you have people who just feel like they're vaccinated and done, and they want to move on. And I think the administration, White House, and others are basically saying they're taking that position also. If you're not vaccinated, it's your fault if you get sick. But for the rest of us, we want to move on to a better, be in a better place on COVID. I think it makes me think that we're going to be a different place going forward in the pandemic. That we are moving toward a place of, I think, a lot of people accepting this is what we have. We're going to have to live with COVID. We're going to have to live with the risk of COVID, live with the possibility of COVID, live with maybe getting sick from COVID, but we are going to move forward. We're not going to continue to wallow in fear over COVID. And I think that's a good thing. Yes, I understand people still get sick. People are still going to die. That's awful. It's tragic. But if you're vaccinated and you're boosted, you are incredibly safe from getting COVID and from dying from COVID.
Well, I was going to button it up earlier, and I'm glad you made that last point. But I was going to say, I hope that better place for you is Cancun. Get there, my friend. And
I look forward to it.
We'll be looking at your pictures, which is the only thing you'll be sharing, hopefully. But thank you for sharing here tonight. A lot of issues in a short amount of time. Really appreciate your brilliance and your ability to articulate it, sir. Everybody go to truthandcons.com right now. Okay, sir. I will talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Pete. Great to be here.
All right, there he goes, Speech Boy 71. That is Michael Cohen, and always great catching up with him. I hope he gets to Cancun. All right, and now it's time to get to my second guest, who I was should have just pressed play on this interview today, but Peter Coyote is a legend to me and to the stand-up community. He was a longtime listener of the old show, used to email me really thoughtful emails and just sign them Peter C. Didn't know who he was, but I read him. I was like, this guy's smart. He would sometimes call the program and just say his name was Peter. And at some point, I recognized his voice. And I said, are you Peter Coyote, the American actor, author, director, screenwriter, and narrator of films, theater, television, and audiobooks, including so many of the Ken Burns award-winning documentaries? Is that you? And he said, yeah, that's me. And we became friends and have been for a long time. I've turned him several times in my life on and off the air because he's also a Buddhist priest and just an amazing guy. Just turned 80 this year, and he has accomplished so much in his life and his career and activism. And he's written several books now. He's got a new book out, which I'm very excited to talk with him about. It's provocatively titled The Lone Ranger and Tonto Meet Buddha, Masks, Meditation, and Improvised Play to Induce Liberated States. It sounds highbrow, but he explains it at the end of our conversation, and it's amazing, as always. Get all of his books. He is on Twitter and on Facebook, where you can watch his Dharma Talks. Links to both of them in today's show notes, as there is for all of my guests. Ladies and gentlemen, Peter Coyote. I should mention, just real quick, we do have some internet blips in this, but I think they're totally tolerable. I think the audio was pretty great. And he opens by reading two of the recent op-eds that he'd sent. Normally, I wouldn't want someone, including myself, to read for that long. But this is probably one of the most respected and appreciated voiceover actors of our time. And he's an amazing thinker as well. I think both of these op-eds that he mentions are great. So let's get it started right now with the legend.
These are two. I've been writing letters to the editor to my local paper, which is Sonoma County Press Democrat, Santa Rosa Press Democrat, and they've been doing that. Now they've upped me to opinion pieces. So they've published the first one about money in the political system, and the second one is about vaccine mandates. And I just wanted to share it with you. You can decide if you want to send it out to your audience or not.
Go ahead.
It's called... It starts with a quote. "If you don't wear pink on Wednesdays, you can't sit with us." Karen Smith, Katie Heron, Mean Girls. This seems to be the way that many people respond to mandates, as if they're being unfairly judged and excluded. Not surprisingly, their response is usually shame, aggression, or defensiveness. For a trivial issue like personal style, it's an understandable response. But let's change the context a moment. Unvaccinated people are becoming seriously ill and dying in extraordinary numbers, hosting new cases of the COVID virus. They threaten public health by becoming petri dishes, nurturing vaccine-eluding variants like Omicron. When they sicken, they arrive at the hospital and receive state-of-the-art care like everyone else. As a consequence, hospitals are bursting at the seams. Doctors are taking out ads begging people to become vaccinated. Nurses are sick, exhausted, and even quitting the business. Beds are not available for patients requiring operations, cancer treatments, or emergency room aftercare. From this point of view, the 55% of citizens who've been meticulous about caring for themselves, relatives, and neighbors by becoming vaccinated, boosted, and vigorous about matters are penalized by the careless behavior of the 45%, cloaking their refusals in whack-a-mole conspiracy theories. Irritated as one might be about plaints concerning personal liberty, simple decency and the Hippocratic Oath will demand that anyone who arrives ill at a hospital will be treated. Consequently, that reduces our options to three: mandating vaccines, triaging patients, and/or refusing to pay medical costs of the unvaccinated. Mandates are not a sinister new example of government overreach. Vaccinations for mumps, chickenpox, measles, diphtheria, tuberculosis are mandatory in most school districts. Seatbelts are a mandate. Motorcycle helmets are mandated in many states, as are bicycle helmets. A stop sign is a mandate. To overcome resistance to vaccinations, it will require unyielding pressure, perhaps denying income tax rebates, unemployment benefits, car registrations, or driver's license renewal. At the least, refusing access to any public venues, the Mean Girls option. This will also require uncounterfeitable vaccination cards. Triage, from the French word to select, is already common medical practice. If you show up for a liver transplant with a history of alcohol use, you move to the back of the line. Ditto for a lung transplant if you're a smoker. There are other criteria for heart transplants. Faced with overwhelming patients, perhaps hospitals will have to move the unvaccinated to the back of the line for available beds. The no pay option. The final option might be that insurance companies, public and private, begin to reconsider whether or not they'll continue to bear the costs of people who've taken so few precautions to protect themselves and their community. Tough steps for tough times. That's what I do with my time. That's my practice of engaged Buddhism.
Well, I think that is great. I'm so glad that you are combining all of your wisdom and your philosophy and writing it and sending it and putting it out in a public space. And I just recorded that, and I'm going to share the whole thing. And I'm going to share it on social media as well. Like, I feel at this point you write that's an op-ed for the nation, for the world. When things live in only one place that should be heard and seen in many places, and there's so many places. You need a TikTok account. We all do. That's great. I think,
can I read you one more that was published last Sunday?
Absolutely, please. Yes.
Okay. We hear it every day. 70% of Americans favor stricter gun laws. 70% want to outlaw assault weapons. 70% favor maintaining a woman's right to choose. David Hogg, the brilliant young survivor of the 2018 high school shooting in Parkland, Florida, appeared on the morning news recently describing rallies to secure background checks and reasonable gun regulations as the largest in history. Andrea Mitchell, the news anchor, pointed out that in spite of such numbers, there's no federal legislation on the issue, and asked him how he felt about, quote, the political stalemate in this country, close quote. In such a context, any query that includes the word politics is a fig leaf lofting the comforting image of principled men and women debating policies and nuances of the law, struggling together to create a more perfect union. That is a mental pet that Newt Gingrich dragged out into a field and shot 25 years ago. Creating diversions to disguise the hidden cancer metastasizing in our political system, money, the Gordian knot binding together most of our political dysfunctions. Apparently, it's taboo to mention publicly that our entire political system is organized around raising, hoarding, and spending it. When the Supreme Court declared political contributions to be free speech, capital was afforded ownership of the soapbox and the megaphone. Its desires now trump human needs. As a consequence, our political system forces the most principled public servants into draconian choices to remain in office. The least principled simply open their suitcases to receive the bundled money. Donations are repaid with legislative favors and tax fiddles invisible to the average citizen. Over the past 50 years, these creative fiddles have resulted in the middle 60% of American earners, what economists call the middle class, owning only 26.6% of the national wealth, according to Bloomberg News. The top 1% controls 27%, which is to say more than the entire middle class. A three-step solution could transform our government from a wholly owned subsidiary of Wall Street into an agency operating for the public benefit. 1, full federal funding of elections. Taxpayers hire the legislators, give each the same amount of money, and study their creativity in spending it. 2, prohibit all corporate donations. They are donating to alter public policy to benefit their shareholders. Their employees are free to vote. 3, prohibit all gifts and emoluments from lobbyists. According to Reuters, 12,553 federal lobbyists in Washington spend more than $3.5 billion annually on our Congress. Recent decisions facilitating unlimited anonymous political contributions have enfeebled the power of voters, transforming our founders' system into a corporatocracy. Anxious to deliver a death blow to voter resistance, Republicans now seek to guarantee permanent victory in future elections by making it legal for their secretaries of states and legislators to overturn the people's electors. In the face of this death sentence to democracy, Democrats lull themselves to sleep, maintaining the charade that we still live in the imagined nation, founded and forged by George Washington, Ben Franklin, James Madison, et al. What a sorry, indulgent, spoiled pack of children we've become. Parkland survivor David Hogg, half the age of my own children, said it best. If the system fails to protect young people, It endangers the future of our republic. A child can see that, but the Supreme Court and legislators dependent on donations to survive cannot.
I took a lot of notes on that one.
So says Big Mouth.
No,
anyway,
I like it a lot. And if I can just jump into a question that ties maybe both of those op-eds together that I think that you can speak to. You had this line in that one that says, capital desires Trump, human needs. And I think that is true of the other op-ed and COVID-related issues. And the question to you is, we need to have a different conversation or define certain words and ideas differently than that we do. Freedom, wealth, liberty, national security, spending $1 trillion on defense when the enemy is A, domestic terrorists, and B, health issues.
Racism, economic diversity, and the pandemic. Andrew Bacevich, very brilliant.
He's a friend.
Know who he is?
Yeah, he's a friend. I've had dinner with him. He's joined me on the show many times.
Okay, so me too. So his last book was about exactly this.
Yes.
Exactly this. The military, like the French just before World War II, completely missing the boat, building battleships, sophisticated submarines, nuclear weapons, which have done zip shit about protecting us against COVID, racism, white supremacy, the economic divide. So, yeah, it's the same issue.
Well,
and if you go back go ahead.
I was just going to say when you say racism, I think most people would say, how is that an issue? And that's because it's not an issue for most people. But if you're a person of color or a person who's marginalized, discriminated against regularly, that is your national security issue on a regular basis. It's our fault for not talking to them to see them. But after 9/11, I've said this many times on the show, but after 9/11, I was interviewing a black comedian, and he just started making fun of me and other white people for being afraid of terrorism for the first time in our lives.
Yes, exactly right. And so the flip side of that is that the invisible, the privileges that white people get that are invisible to them. White people never worry if they're in the wrong place. They never worry about keeping their hands outside their pockets in a store so they won't be accused of pickpocketing. They never accuse of having to relax white people by laughing all the time. And the problem is not, as most white people define it, being rude to a black person. The problem is systemic racism, which makes it impossible for black people to get equal education, business loans, feel safe for their life in the hands of the police. So it's a problem because we can't come together as one people. And I don't know what we're spending in cities like Chicago and the killing zones in black neighborhoods we allow to exist, but it's a lot of money. And it's certainly destroying our unity as a nation.
Yeah, I mean, but even more specifically, if the threat is terrorist, who should Americans generally be more afraid of? Al-Qaeda, jihadist, Muslim militant terrorists from foreign countries, or even maybe homegrown radicalists here in America, or white supremacists, extremist militias, which are clearly almost every day, if you read the newspaper, they are either getting caught attempting or plotting some crime. And again, going back to who are they committing the crime to minimize and marginalize, and what are they doing what are they trying to uphold? Back to your point, just about the national security issue for black and brown folks in this country is completely different. The concern.
Well, and for white people, there was a decision made during the Bush administration to basically put white separatists and white terrorists off the chart. So we were bombing, strafing, doing targeted killings of brown people and Muslims all over the globe. And while we were doing that, the white malefactors in our own country were completely ignored by law enforcement. Yeah. They were just off the chart. So this is another way in which racism enters the picture. Well, those guys are not going to bother me. Well, that's what you think until they take over the reins of government. and you say something they don't agree with. So I'm a big fan of Andrew Bacevich. I consider him a friend too. He's given me a blurb for one of my books, and I've helped him with the Quincy Institute. But he's the only guy talking about military policy and social policy in a way that makes sense to me.
Are you familiar with Spencer Ackerman and his new book, Reign of Terror?
Yes, I'm reading it.
Oh, good.
I'm reading it right now. Yep. Good. It's really good.
Yeah,
and that's where I got that. That's where I learned more fully about the way in which white terrorists were put off the charts after 9/11.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a very good book.
When you moved close to that mic, by the way, it sounded better when you were a little closer just now.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll sit over it.
That's fine. We all want the coyote, all of it. So what have you been up to? Let's talk about the pandemic and how it's affected our lives in so many different ways. I'm super interested to hear how you think the pandemic has affected America, American culture, or, humanity, because if it wasn't so horrific in terms of how many lives it's taken and destroyed, it would be interesting to kind of examine what it has done to change the way that we live, talk, treat each other. Do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think about it all the time. First of all, I think about the fact that most of the people I know who are middle class people, white people by and large, but more even middle class is more apt, are afforded the privilege of sequestering. So we work from home, and by a trick of definition, we've nominated our entire underclass as essential workers. And they're the ones that have to go out and face an unvaccinated public and do the deliveries and do the garbage and doing the this and that. If they're essential workers, they ought to be paid as essential workers. Why should a basketball player get $20 million and the guy who's serving your food or delivering your groceries or taking care of your house is barely able to live on $10 or $12 an hour? So that's one thing that's become very clear. And the pandemic has really clarified those fault lines, that people who are living 12 to an apartment cannot social distance. People who live in neighborhoods where there are no vaccinations, or who have difficulty getting this stuff, or live in rural areas that are underserved. So we have a completely unequal medical system in the same way that we have a completely unequal economic system. And now I'm seeing really disturbing signs. For instance, the CDC is announcing, well, you only have to sequester for 5 days, but they're not calling for a test after 5 days to see that so you could still be harvesting bacteria and viruses and go back to your workplace and reintroduce it to others. And this seems to me like a completely political adjustment, that we got to get bodies out of the house. They're going nuts. We got to get the kids in school no matter what. No figures have been released that I can find about how many schools have re-adjudicated their ventilation systems, about all their procedures. There's no mask mandates in a lot of schools. So once again, the political system is bowing to political outrage and malefactors and bad behavior and putting people literally at risk. And there's an answer to it. And the answer is you open up the public treasury. You open up the treasury and you do what they did during the height of the first pandemic. You give people money to keep their employees fed, to be able to keep their businesses in place, to prevent landlords from throwing people out in the street. And you stop worrying about the public debt. We can print the money. They had $1 trillion to give to Trump's richest supporters. Nobody blinked at that. Joe Manchin is not asking for any money to retrain coal miners to get out of their extinct business, which is killing the rest of us. He could have asked for more money and begun training his coal miners how to do something else, computer work, online work, whatever it is.
Solar panels.
I see the same collaboration of wealth and power protecting its own and putting everybody else at risk and inconvenience. That's what I see. And I see people are frightened and it's more acceptable to express rage than fear. So we see all these viral videos of people nutting in a Walmart because somebody asked them to wear a mask. Well, that's a fear reaction. That's not, we call it rage, but it feels more manly to be outraged. It feels more potent, but it's actually fear. And, I think at this point it's becoming Darwinian. We're going to see Florida, Mississippi, Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, these states just start to lose people, lose voters. And I don't know whether the Ron DeSantis and that Texas governor who's as dumb as a pile of rocks think only Democrats are going to die, but they're going to lose voters. They're going to lose uneducated people. So maybe they think only uneducated people vote for Democrats. I don't know.
I mean, you're making a lot of sense with all of your points here in terms of foreign policy, economics, racism, and everything. But it seems like the issue right now, it happens to be like people will believe anything. The conspiracy theories, people are just buying the craziest things. And if I'd love to have a serious argument, disagreement with people on policy and priorities and ethics and so on. But as long as, a high percentage of people think that what they think about vaccines, what they think about climate, what they think about the election, it's just they're living in Earth 2.0. Like, what has worked? How concerned are you about losing more and more people down the rabbit holes of Alex Jones, et cetera?
Well, I'm completely concerned. And there's a simple premise that I ask, which is, why should you be allowed to lie on the public airwaves? I mean, let's just start there. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. You can't scream lie that's going to create a panic. But Facebook and the social media apps have generated so much money, and in a political system which is organized around money, in a Congress which is a wholly owned subsidiary of money, that's what's public policy. So in this film, I saw this film called The Social Contract, where a whole bunch of vice presidents from Facebook and TikTok and social media said, our algorithms are leading the country toward civil war. This is what we're afraid of. We won't let our kids watch it. So this is no different than tobacco manufacturers letting other people smoke and stopping their kids from smoking. So until we have some framework of rules, like you have in a basketball game, like you have in a football game. Guy couldn't even underinflate a football by 2 pounds without making a scandal a few years ago, because everyone intuitively understood that without a common set of rules, a basic assumption of what goes on, you can't play football, baseball, or basketball. You can't let one guy use a bat that weighs 12 pounds. So until we are serious about privileging the public space and the value of information, and that not all speech is protected, speech that's designed to overthrow our system should not be protected by our system. I'm sorry. I mean, it's like Holocaust deniers. It's against the law in Germany to do that. They're not kidding around. They destroyed their country this way. So they are setting the same kind of reasonable controls on speech that we would like to set on guns.
You make too much sense, but I always feel in terms of that argument that it would be, even if there were laws in place, policies in place, they would find ways around getting that speech out now with the way, technology is, and they would just be able to continue to platform it, or that as we have deplatformed the craziest people in different situations. For example, there was a doctor who was removed from Twitter because he was saying crazy things about the vaccine, but then the most popular podcaster in the country had him on his show, and he's on Spotify, Joe Rogan. I mean, I guess you could get him off Spotify, but then he's going to go somewhere else. And it just seems to be an impossible thing to prevent the craziest people in the world from going on the most popular platforms and saying whatever they want about the moon being made of cheese, which you may have an opinion on.
Why are they doing that? Somebody is getting rich doing it. So if you cut off the money, If you give them a Dixie cup and a thread and say whatever you want, I'm not really worried about it. But when you allow technology to amplify everything they say in ways which are visibly eroding the safeguards and safety nets of the country, visibly separating it. I mean, look now, Ohio and Michigan have overruled their legislators, the courts have overruled their Republican legislators who were gerrymandering, because most of the people in those states don't want gerrymandering. They don't want candidates to be able to pick their voters. They want candidates to have to compromise between the extremes of the voters and come up with reasonable issues that will win the majority. So until we start creating rules that are going to generate a society that runs well, which means no gerrymandering, which means safeguards on the elections, which means federal standards for elections, which means federal standards for voting, we're not going to be the United States. And if you go all the way back and read the Federalist Papers, you'll see the entire Federalist Papers were an argument about why a collection of single states would fail. Very brilliant, very prescient arguments. So even now, Putin and Biden are talking to one another, and Putin wants a guarantee that NATO is not going to keep recruiting. So why is he saying that? He's saying that because the Cuban Missile Crisis was solved by the United States government making a deal with the Russians. You'll take your missiles out of Cuba. We'll take our missiles out of Turkey, which are on your border, and we will not include any new Eastern European countries in NATO. So we leave the Russians of their hegemony in their area, and we made that deal. And that deal was in force until Clinton broke it. And Clinton began recruiting Eastern European countries. Now, I think Putin is a murderer. I think he's a thug. I think he's an autocrat. But when you've allowed NATO to come up, press against all his borders, and then Ukraine decides they want to vote to go with the West, you know he has to do something. So we can blame him, but we've pushed him into that corner. And if you push a rat into a corner, you find a way out. And they say the same thing about Iran. Without making deals and regulations and saying this is the way everybody gets what they need, you can't have a peaceful globe or a peaceful country.
I wanted to ask you, given your perspective on your long life, Wikipedia says you're 80. Is that right now?
Yeah, I turned 80 in October.
God damn, you look so goddamn good, Peter Coyote. I wish I were.
You should see it from the inside.
I wish I were there to run my hand through your hair, but I'm not done. So I have to ask you about something about your life, which is.
I'll do it.
Oh, look that's my porn right there. I mean, I just got to ask you about voting rights. The argument that I've kind of tried to make with people is, we got a lot of folks quoting Martin Luther King, content of the character, not the color of your skin. That's the America that we want to live in. A lot of folks who I would consider are pretty racist, ignorant bigots using that quote. It's my understanding, according to history, that the primary initiative, although there were so many others, that King and the Civil Rights Movement and John Lewis and others fought for was voting rights. And guess what? They won. They got voting rights. Recently, the Supreme Court gutted Dr. King's signature achievement. And right now, that's what we're trying to restore in America. You witnessed that with your long, amazing life. You were a part of that movement. And so I just have to ask your perspective, given it seems like we're fighting the same fight that you fought and others fought in the 60s, again in 2022.
Well, on some level, everything goes back to the American people. When the American people elect a completely divided legislature with no margins, everything is a compromise. You're dealing with, John Kennedy was dealing with Southern segregationists. Johnson was dealing with Southern segregationists. They had a huge amount of power. They controlled the Democratic Party in some sense, but the people put up enough fuss the first civil rights marches where you saw everyday black people dressed like they were going to church, never raising their voices unless it was in song, being set upon by peckerwood necks and mobs and dogs and fire hoses, it drew a line in the sand. And you had to make a decision which side of that line you were going to be on. And that line was either going to be trying to fulfill the promise of America as it was written by slaveholders, but who knew better, who saw the future, who wanted something else, or whether you were going to let racists and people whose economic well-being was founded in suppression win the day. And so to me, the issue from Jump Street, voting rights, but Biden had no margins. And if I was Biden, I would probably be thinking, if I can get the infrastructure bill through, and if I can get the Build Back Better through, I'll get money in people's pockets. I'll show them that government does things for them. I'll relax the competition for scarce goods and resources, and then I'll be able to do voter rights. But unfortunately, it's such a capstone legislation that without it, we lose control of the process. So I'm with you. It's the number one thing. Americans have to say, are you really threatened by black people doing better? Are you really threatened by Mexicans and Asians doing better? It may mean you're going to have to try harder. It may mean that your kid just can't roller derby all through high school and college and come take his seat as a CEO. But really, it's going to be better for everybody. You're not going to have to look over your shoulder at the auto teller when you're taking money out at night. And so until the American people give somebody margins, give the Democrats margins with which to do that, we're stuck with this ridiculous two-party system, which is, it's not nearly as responsive as a parliament would be, but it's what we've got. And it's why you're getting 50 fundraising letters every single day, no matter how much money you give to the Democrats, as if your $100 or $250 is going to counter the hedge funds and the derivative traders and the finance, insurance, and real estate industries that actually own 60% of this government. So, I mean, people have to agree to make a change, and Congress will never vote to end money. And the only way that I've been able to even conceive of this happening would be a kind of general strike where people just say, you know what, we're just going to stop shopping.
Yeah.
We're going to buy as little as we possibly can, a gallon of gas, trade clothes with our friends, stop buying shit until we get control of our Congress back and get some clean money, federal regulations against being controlled by capital. I don't know how to do it.
Can we continue to buy sustainable products like Patagonia? I really like, I just bought a vest and I think I'll keep it for 25 years. So.
Yeah, you will. I'm in the Patagonia family. I get a discount from them. I've worked with them for years.
Of course you have.
Yeah. I mean, yes, of course. There are going to be a lot of people punished. People are not going to be allowed to not pay their rent. But somehow there has to be a slowdown so that the coins stop dropping into the tin cups that are owned by the 1% and 1/10 of 1%. I can't see another way to do it unless the whole thing falls apart.
What do you say to the collective darkness that has creeped upon society, this feeling of existentialism that used to be more particular to people who knew about philosophy, now really feeling and living, being forced to kind of live in a way to stay in the moment for fear of what tomorrow brings? How do we cope in a time with a pandemic and with dwindling democracy and the climate emergency and all of the rest of the things, some of which we talked about? How do we get up, go about our day, find joy, do all the things we might have done before that we perhaps took for granted, maybe?
Well, you're talking to a Buddhist priest.
That's why I asked you.
So for me, the first step is not believing everything you think. Interrogating your own mind, interrogating the train of thought that runs through that inner speak that we all take for granted is us. And the best mechanism I know to do that is meditating. Meditating actually softens our personality, makes it more like a colander, because our personality is just this tiny little thing in the immensity of the universe. But it's the immensity of the universe that produced us. Without oxygen, there's no us. Without sunlight, there's no us. Without water, there's no us. Without pollinating insects, there's no us. Without microbes in the soil, there's no us. So you can take it all the way out to the Earth's place in space. If we were closer to the sun, water would burn off, no us. If we were farther away, water would freeze, no us. And the Earth is being held that way by all the gravitational forces of the universe. So we're actually doing very little. We're not making our hearts beat. We're not making ourselves breathe. We're not making the millions of processes that keep our bodies together. So we call that big mind. We call that oscillating, formless energy that keeps changing into things, big mind. So meditating allows you to put like holes in your personality to let big mind leak in. And in big mind, everything's there. There are no contradictions. All the questions, all the answers, all the oppositions are all contained by what Buddhists call emptiness, which is the great common denominator. Imagine an ocean that was made up of millions of little choppy waves, not big rollers, little individual choppy waves. Each one of those choppy waves could be a named thing in the universe. Could be a person, could be a leopard, could be a mountain range, could be a solar system, anything you could name. But the principle is the same. It comes out of the formlessness of the ocean, and it assumes form for a while. Maybe the 24 hours of a mayfly, maybe the centuries of a mountain range. It assumes form, and then it goes back into the ocean. And when it's in form, if it's a person, we call it living. And when it goes back to the ocean, we call it dead. But what we forget, and what those little waves forget, is that they've never for one instant not been part of the ocean. And when you meditate, you remember that you're part of the ocean. You remember that you're made of the ocean. You're not different from Donald Trump. You're not different from the neighbor you hate. You may behave differently, but you're not essentially different. You have no higher right here than they do. So when you do that over and over and over, you learn to detach from your thoughts, because you're putting part of your awareness in your posture and in the little hand gesture called a mudra. Looks like this. You lay one hand over the other, and you keep, this is your attention gauge. If this collapses, you're not paying attention. If your thumbs come apart, you're not paying attention. So you're in a posture, and you're following your exhales, and you're watching that mudra, and that part of your awareness can't be captured by your train of thought. So it's like making a little ledge that you can watch your thinking on, and you can just let the mind spin out and be spinning out, being the mind, because you're not caught by it. It's like sitting in a car with a clutch. You can put the clutch in, you can race the engine as much as you want. It's not going anywhere. When you need to go, you let the clutch out. So most of the time, we don't have to think too much in life. Everything's being done for us. We're being breathed, our heart's being beaten. We know where we left the tomato. When we have to think, you can let the clutch out and you can engage with your mind and dedicate it to something. But the problem with most people is when something comes that gets them frightened or upset or anxious or that they really want, they glom onto it and it runs them around and it makes them do a lot of undignified, crazy things. And what Buddha taught was that by meditating, you can contain those impulses. You can face the peppery wind of reality with dignity. There's nothing dignified about being a drunk. There's nothing dignified about being a junkie. There's nothing dignified about having illicit affairs, being a compulsive shopper, a compulsive gambler. What meditation teaches you is that we're all being constantly afflicted by the world. That's the first noble truth, affliction. When we're afflicted, things arise in the mind. Neither of those are our fault. Buddha calls them noble truths. Why? Truth means, first of all, real. And noble means worthy of respect, worthy of dignity. So affliction and arising, you have no control over. They just come. The third noble truth is called containment. In the first one is dukkha. The second one is samudaya. The third one is called nirodha. And it's something any peasant could understand. It's like a clay wall around a fire pit. And it stops the sparks from leaping out of the fire pit and burning down the fields and the village. If you throw gasoline on the ground, it does nothing. If you put it in the container of an engine, it does work. So what Buddha teaches us is that because everything is dependent on everything else, you can sit with whatever arises and you can watch it, you can feel it, you can watch it come and you can watch it go. And when you can contain the energy of affliction and arising, that's what moves you around. That's what moves you away from the fire.
Right.
That's what makes you want to give somebody the finger. When you can contain it, then you can follow the Eightfold Path, which is how to live a life of service and help to others, of dignity, making the world better. And he's trying to enlist you in a big game to save all people. So if you want to have a good time again, if you want to relax, you have to not be attached to your mind. You have to have resting places. You can't just believe everything you think. And you have to practice sitting still and learning to trust your posture, learning to trust your body, and learning to build discipline and attention to deal with whatever comes up. We've all got a junkyard dog inside us that's tearing the territory up. And we need to housebreak it. And you can only housebreak it by being still. End of lecture.
Oh, too bad. I want more. Wow, that was wonderful, and I just love to talk to you for all of the reasons that we've been talking to you and all of your answers, and what a pleasure and an honor. I guess before I let you go, I do want to ask you one more thing, which is about your book. If you want to talk about The Lone Ranger and Tonto Meet Buddha, I haven't gotten it yet, but when I do, I'd like to do a more thorough conversation about it. But talk to me about the subtitle: Masks, Meditation, and Improvised Play to Induce Liberated States. What are we talking about?
Well, just remind me that I have to get your mailing address, but I'll tell you what it is.
I'll email you.
So the first time I ever put on a mask in the San Francisco Mime Troupe and looked in a mirror, it was an utter revelation. All of a sudden, P.D. Coyote disappeared. And the guy that was trying to be a nice guy, a kind guy, a well-behaved guy, all this stuff was gone. And with that departure also went all my self-consciousness, all my self-criticism, all my second-guessing, all my self-doubt. I never forgot that. When I began to study Buddhism seriously, and I was working as an actor, I began to see that there were some congruences between certain meditative states, certain acting states, where you were really free to get outside your own personality. And about 40 years ago, I developed these classes and these criteria where after about 4.5 hours of messing with you in a safe environment, making you do things without thinking, changing your posture, changing the way you behave, changing your status, so that you run into the edges of the self. You go, oh, that's not me. Well, you just saw an edge of the self. So if I do that for 4 or 5 hours and push you in a way that's not going to make you freeze up, when I put a mask on you and I hold a mirror up in front of you, Pete Dominick will go. And you will see in the mask some holographic personality that you will understand to the depth of your being, with everything you know about yourself as a category in this new self. Your posture will be different. Your walk will be different. You can answer me about your siblings, about everything. And so I'll do 3 people at a time, and I'll have them interact with the class and with each other. And they do it for about 10 minutes, and then we switch masks, and they find a new character, and they do it again. By the time they've done it 3 times, cold sober, they are open to hear me talk about Buddha's understanding that was no fixed self, that the thing we call ourself is just an awareness. There's no little organ like a walnut with your name on it, tucked under your liver, or no little homunculus behind your forehead doing your seeing, hearing, and living. Your eyes have awareness, your ears have awareness, your body has awareness, mind kind of has its own awareness that includes them all. But there's nothing that corresponds to an organ, which is a self. So once you understand that you're just sort of an empty pipe filled with awareness, nobody can insult you. Nobody can get on your bummer side. I mean, whatever you put your awareness to will fill that space. And so what I tell people is that if you want to recreate this on your own, you need to learn how to meditate, and you need to learn Buddha's description of reality. Now, because there's a lot of heavy lifting in that, I thought, well, that'll get dry. So I wrote this parable about the Lone Ranger and Tonto, whose scriptwriter died, and they were lost in the desert, and they were fat and overweight, and the horses were lame. They didn't know how to get anywhere. They had nobody writing their script. And they see the Buddha camping under a cottonwood tree, and they go over there, and he jumps up. He takes such great care of their horses. He wraps comfrey leaves around their lame feet. He takes the saddlebags off. He airs out the blankets. He airs out the saddles. That the Lone Ranger says to Tonto sotto voce, this guy must be the well-trained servant of a very, very rich man. Let's stick around. Maybe we can get a loan from this guy. Maybe he'd even invest in a movie. Who knows what's going to happen? Of course, the Buddha sees through this bingo, and he keeps them, and he plays a beneficent trick on them. And he gets them to help build a treasure house for his master out of stone. These guys are hauling boulders and hawking down trees, and they're getting in good shape, and they're building a camp, and each one has a kind of enlightenment experience. And it's a kind of good-humored way. The Lone Ranger stands for the epitome of 1950s white entitlement. And Tonto is just a human being, comes from a different culture. But both of them have human dilemmas, and both of them have an enlightened experience. And for me, it was like a good-hearted, lighthearted way of explaining what happens, what all these exercises and practices are actually about. So that book is out now, and send me your address. I'll send you one. It's on Amazon. And so, too, is my first book of poems called The Tongue of a Crow. And as I told you, I've been pimping myself on every podcast and interview, and it's like, I hope I'm selling books, but I have no idea.
How important is it to you for you to sell books?
Well, it's important to sell enough that the publisher will do the next one.
Right.
I mean, my first book, Sleeping Where I Fall, has sold about 55,000 books, but it came out in 1999, but it's still in print. And my second one's called The Rain Man's Third Cure. That's still in print. So they sell enough to stay in print, which I like.
The Rain Man's Third Cure is the one I've read, and I absolutely love that book. Love. I learned so much.
You never read the first one?
Nope.
Okay, it's coming to you.
No, I'll go buy them all. No, friends don't. I buy the books, but I hope everybody listening will also purchase these books as a way to thank you for joining us, and especially
purchase them from an independent bookstore if you can. If you can't, buy them from Amazon. But it's always better to help out a small bookstore.
Absolutely,
they'll order them for you,
especially now. Okay, sir. Well, I hope you'll join us for our group at some point, whenever you want. We do Thursday nights.
I will.
And I just...
At what time?
What's that?
At what time?
We do Thursday nights at 8 p.m. almost every week.
8 p.m. Eastern.
Is there another time zone?
Yeah, 8 p.m. Eastern, I'm in bed. But sometime I'll do it. I'm on the Pacific time zone.
You're in bed at 5
earlier.
You're not in bed at 5 p.m. Eastern.
Oh, that's right. Sorry, I was thinking 11.
Maybe you are.
This is why NASA turned me down to run the space shuttle. Thursday nights at 5 p.m. All right, send me a link. I'll show up sometimes.
Oh, you tease us. You kid us. We're very excited. Very, very excited by the prospect of that.
I will do.
Okay, sir. Please be in touch. Call me anytime just to shoot the shit. I'm very excited about your new work, and I am so grateful to be in your presence today, even virtually.
Thank you so much.
All right, bud.
Take care, Pete.
All right, I'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
How do I hang up?
There's a thing at the bottom that says leave studio, the X.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I got it. All right,
bud. Later.
See ya.
See ya. Yes, sir. There you go. Peter Coyote, the one and only. Wasn't that hilarious at the end when he couldn't? I left that in there. I thought that was funny. I love all of the weird words and things that he says. Nutting and auto teller and roller derby and jump street. While I love that last part of the conversation obviously was my favorite part. I love to hear him talk about meditation and Buddhism and getting centered and just having a practice to deal with all of the things that we're dealing with. So I hope you took away from that as much as I did. Also, he meant the social contract, not the social dilemma, I think. And thanks for putting up with little audio blips. Hopefully that wasn't too annoying, if it ever is. If there are ever any audio issues at all, please email me right away, standupwithpete@gmail.com. Thank you to Michael Cohen as well, and to you for supporting the show. Welcome to new subscribers. Sign up now, standupwithpete.com. We will see you tomorrow night at the Hangout if you are a subscriber, and talk about everything that has been going on this week and in your life, and have fun as always. Right now, hopefully John Carroll will be there. He's always here with us, singing us out with our very own song, Stand Up.
All you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence, even if it ain't a very friendly audience. They'll begin to listen when you start making sense, and you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town, just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up, and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well, and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up, stand up. Oh, got to stand